name's Vicky, and today I'm going to take you through one of my favourite crafts, which is traditional decoupage. So in this time of lockdown where we're finding ourselves at home with family, with children, it's a really easy craft that adults and children can do together. So a few weeks ago I created this sign down here, which is intended to be placed on the side of a chicken coop in an allotment area. And it got me thinking that actually maybe I could record myself producing a few more of these things. And what I'm going to take you through today is going to be another sign like that one, but it's from my friend's garden. Okay, so if you don't know what traditional decoupage is, it's basically collage. And you can produce little signs like this one, right the way through to something bigger, like this one, which you could use, as it says, for a wedding. The basic idea is using paper, glue, scissors, and creating a three-dimensional object using a collage technique. Okay, so you don't need complicated pieces of equipment. These are things that you can find lying around your house, your garden, out on your daily walk. You might come across, you know, a random piece of wood like this. I use little terracotta plant pots, anything really, anything. You can even do it on ceramic. So once you've got your object, what else do you need? Okay, so you need some PVA glue, a selection of brushes, obviously some scissors, lots and lots of papers. So here I have a whole selection of papers that I keep in these little folders, and anything that I can find to hold all my bits and pieces of cuttings. This is a small selection of the stuff that I've got. You can use old maps, you can use bits and pieces out of magazines, nice wrapping paper, anything paper. The thinner the better, and I'll explain why in a little while. So to begin with, as you can see here, I've cut out the motifs that I'm going to use today because it saves a lot of time, but I am going to show you some cutting techniques just so that you can get an idea of what it is that I've cut out here and how sometimes that can be quite detailed and intricate, and there's a specific technique that you can use with your scissors to get the best results. Okay, so I've got a few motifs here that I'm going to use just to show you a few simple cutting techniques. So make the first cut around the leaf, okay? And instead of moving your scissors, you twist the paper and keep the scissors relatively still so that you can actually pick out a lot of the detail of the flowers. It saves your hands and wrists having to sort of turn around like that. It might take a while for you to get the hang of it, but once you do, you'll see that actually it makes life a lot easier, and you can become quite quick at it as well. Right, so here we are. Now we're going to put the design onto the board. Now I've cut mine out, as I've said, because it saves time, but before I start to stick things down, I need to lay everything out so that I'm happy with the spacing before I start to stick things down. So I'm going to start doing that. Going through the process, you may well make a few changes along the way. You may think that some things look better in a different place. Now, this bit of wood, you'll see, it's quite rough, so I'm going to try and avoid these little areas. If you've used something that's much smoother, like a piece of MDF, for example, you don't need to worry about that too much. Now here, I've got some very, very tiny pieces of lettering. You can use the larger font that you find in magazine headlines, but you can also cut out whole sentences if you like them, like I've done just here. But when you're cutting out individual letters, obviously it's quite fiddly. And if you've not got long enough nails, you can use tweezers to manipulate and move each individual piece into place. So here I'd made a little paper traditional deck chair that I wanted to use in the design, just made out of sentences and some striped paper. But actually, having looked at where I've laid everything out now, I'm not actually going to use it, so I'll just save it and use it in another project at some point in the future. Okay, so I'm now going to pour some PVA glue out into a saucer. You could just leave it in the pot if you wanted, but actually it makes it more accessible. Okay, so now is the exciting part, which is sticking everything into place. So what you need to do when you look down at your design and how you've arranged your pieces of motifs, papers, is to look at what are the background layers and get those stuck down first. So if you're doing a bit of layering, you'll see that for me, I'd have to stick down these two letters before the butterfly. So there are certain elements that need to go down first. So, you know, I'll have to, for example, move those two and stick this rose down. So turn the paper over. Make sure you're doing it on a surface that you can wipe down easily, or like me, on a bit of old piece of cardboard that, you know, it doesn't matter if it gets glue all over it. So take the glue right to the edges and cover it thoroughly. So there we are, the first piece down. So gently pat it out to the edges to get rid of any air bubbles. There we go. Now, to begin with, your fingers will be fine. By the end of it, they'll be covered in glue. And that's why here, I've got a slightly damp sponge that I can keep cleaning the tips of my fingers with. So here you'll see that as I've been applying the glue, my motif has snapped, but that's okay because it's snapped into pieces that I can still work with. It doesn't matter. The paper gets obviously very soft and hence tears easily, but you can generally make it work, it doesn't matter. So now I'm on to the fiddly bit of the tiny letters, and this is where my tweezers would come in handy, but I haven't got them to hand, so I'm having to rely on being really, really careful and using my fingers as the background when I paint on the glue, and then I grab the letters at the corners with my nails so that I don't damage the paper. But it is incredibly fiddly. The handy bit about having slightly sticky fingers is that it picks the letters up, so it's quite handy. You'll notice that my style is very quirky and busy, and that's not everyone's cup of tea. But you know, it really is a straightforward craft where you can let your imagination run wild and find your own style. It doesn't have to be like mine with the ransom note letters that sort of typifies what I do. You know, you can do whatever you want. Some of the papers don't stick as well as others, and I mentioned at the beginning about trying to find papers that are thinner. Some people like using tissue paper. I don't, because that's really, really fiddling. It breaks a lot. But the thicker the paper, as it becomes more like thin card, isn't as absorbent when you're working with it. So it requires a little bit of patience in pressing down your cutout pieces. Also, when you come to varnish, the idea behind traditional decoupage is to then add layer upon layer of varnish until you can't feel the the difference between the paper and the surface that you've added the papers to. Now obviously the thicker the paper, the more layers of varnish you need. So it does make it quite a long-winded craft sometimes. I've been doing this now for, on and off, 25 years. And it does require quite a lot of patience. Sometimes things can go wrong, but you know, cutting out and sticking of paper, you can take pieces off, cover pieces up with other bits, you know, you find ways around mistakes. But it is something that anybody can do. You only need, like I said, bits of paper, some glue. You don't even need to worry about the varnish if it's going to be something that you're going to create and have indoors. You know, you don't have to do lots of varnishing. You know, with children, if you haven't got any wood or you haven't got any pots or anything like that, you could just do it on some card or some paper or some greetings cards even. It's the same technique. Any pieces that you have that look like they're going to go off the board and along the edge, you can either choose to fold over the paper or leave it until it's dry and it's hard, and then you can just cut it off with a pair of scissors. So it just depends on how thick the paper is. So this little bit of bunting that I've got here, the paper's quite thick, so I don't want to fold the tiny bit of paper around the corner because I don't think that it will stick. It'll be much better for me to just slice that off when all this is dry. That's everything stuck down now. I'm just cleaning my fingertips on the sponge just to make sure that I get rid of the last sort of remnants of glue. And then what I need to do is just very gently run my fingers across the papers to check if there are any pieces that haven't quite caught down. And anything that I come across, then I can obviously rectify that by using a little bit more glue. What you need to do now is leave this for a couple of hours so that the paper has time to dry, because obviously it's wet at the moment. So for varnishing, you can't do that straight away. You need to just let it rest for a couple of hours and then you can start the varnishing. So here is the finished board that will become a sign. So there's just this little bit here that I have to wait, that I mentioned earlier, that I'll cut off with a craft knife when it's dry. And in a couple of hours I can start varnishing it and it'll be ready to go. So there you have it. That was traditional decoupage, one of my favourite crafts. I hope you enjoyed it. Happy crafting!